I'm Josh Larky. This is the Dominator. We are going to be talking week 8 starts and sits. I've got 16 players for the good people this morning. It's Thursday. And I'm going to hit you with an Underdog Fantasy Pick-4 entry at the end of the show. That's based on some of the players that we're going to talk about right now. Let's get right down into it. It's early. Welcome everyone in. I've got my coffee. Oh, we got it backwards. I usually go with the T-Rex mug. We're going with the Stegosaurus coffee mug this morning. Cheers to all the early risers. That's exactly how Matt instructs I start every show, is with just a long, awkward pause where people commuting to work have no idea what the heck's going on because it's me just sipping coffee out of a Stegosaurus mug. Let's get right down to it. At quarterback position, my priority start of the week is Caleb Williams. Fantasy Pros consensus quarterback 6 of the week at the Commanders. Welcome back, Caleb. All 3 of DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Romo, Dunze have plus matchups. Whether you're lining up on the outside in the slot against the Commanders, it is a plus matchup, even when you adjust for quality of wide receivers faced. Caleb Williams himself is averaging nearly 30 rushing yards per game. That's an extra 3 fantasy points a week just with his legs. He's top 23 fantasy points in week 5, Carolina, and week 6, Jacksonville. Then he gets to week 7 bye. Now he's back. The strong schedule just keeps on rolling for Caleb Williams this week. Stream, Bo Nix. The consensus quarterback 18 this week versus the Panthers. I just talked about how Caleb Williams shredded the Panthers. Well, guess what? I think it's Bo Nix's turn. So Bo Nix is averaging 20 fantasy points per game over his past 3 games. The Panthers are allowing 35 offensive points per game this year. It's basically 5 touchdowns. That's the most in the NFL, as you might expect. Nix himself is averaging more than 6 rushing fantasy points per game. I got a good stat for you. Kyler Murray, right? Yeah, Kyler Murray. Remember, he's had a few big touchdown runs this year. Kyler Murray's doing so well, right? Oh, Kyler Murray has the same amount of rushing fantasy points per game this year as Bo Nix. Bo Nix. There should be a lot of scoring here. It's just the right game environment to stream Nix. And let's move to the running back position. And I've got some more Broncos nuggets for you. So at running back, a really good start this week is Javonte Williams. Consensus running back 19 this week against the Panthers. Yeah. I know he had the 14 carries, 88 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns last week. And he had 3 receptions for 23 yards. It was the blowout win against the Saints. Well, the Panthers are starting Bryce Young this week. Andy Dalton got in a car accident. Expect another blowout win by the Broncos. Expect another blowout. It's the same as last week. The Panthers are allowing 133 rushing yards and 1.9 rushing touchdowns per game to running backs. It sounds like a Javonte Williams game script. The Broncos are 9-point favorites with the fourth highest implied team total in the betting markets. So the bettors out there think there's going to be a lot of touchdowns. Javonte Williams, anytime touchdown odds are minus odds. That's right. He is now favored to score. If you stuck with Javonte Williams this long and he's on your team, you are starting him this week legally. You need to. Another good start this week at running back is Rachaad White. The running back 30 by consensus versus the Falcons. And I know what you're going to say, Josh, what the heck did the show become? We used to be a nation. We used to be a country. Now you're simply recommending the guys who scored 2 touchdowns the week before. Yeah, that's what I'm doing, actually. But here's why. So there's no Chris Godwin. There's no Mike Evans this week. Rachaad White is the team's best pass catching back. He caught all 6 targets for 71 yards and 2 scores on Monday night. I think the pass game usage is going to remain strong. There's nobody out there. We've got Jalen McMillans. We've got Sterling Shepherds. We've got Trey Palmers. There's just not a lot in that receiver room. Running back and receiver targets are often inversely correlated. Essentially, if receivers earn a lot of targets, running backs don't. If running backs earn a lot of targets, receivers don't. So when receivers are not earning targets because they're not very good, running backs have to pick up the slack. I think Rachaad White profiles a lot like Alvin Kamara right now, just slightly fewer carries. He's a top 20 fantasy option for me this week. Turning to wide receiver, I've been hating on him for a few weeks. I capitulate. I surrender. White flag is in the air. We are priority starting George Pickens, wide receiver 18 by the Fantasy Pros consensus versus the Giants. I believe George Pickens had shades of Mike Evans last week versus the Jets. For anyone that watched that game, I think you know what I mean. He caught 5 of his 9 targets for 111 yards and a touchdown. The Giants are a slightly plus matchup for outside receivers, even when adjusting for quality of receiver faced. I think Russell Wilson's he might be the perfect quarterback for George Pickens. Really, really good deep ball and willing to throw it. And that's what a guy like Pickens needs. And if a guy like Pickens needs you to start him. Next up is Jaylen Waddle. Fantasy Pros consensus wide receiver 23 versus the Cardinals. We're going to start him. Tua Tagovailoa should return this week. He was already limited in practice on Wednesday. I'm sure Mike McDaniel just wants to get the passing offense going after Hill and Waddle have essentially done nothing and twiddled their thumbs for the past month. Sure, this is partially a vibes play. I'm not going to hit you with 10 stats simply because, hey, we don't have a lot of a sample this year of Waddle with Tua. We've got a pass sample, though. It's been pretty good of past years. But here's, I think, how we should not overthink it. Jaylen Waddle was a 2-3 turn pick, round 2-3 turn pick in fantasy football this summer with Tua Tagovailoa at quarterback. That is what you're getting in a solid matchup against the Cardinals. Wide receiver 23 is simply too low. And now coming at wide receiver 40 by Fantasy Pros consensus, we've got 2 more for you at receiver. This guy, we're digging a little deep, not too deep yet. Jerry Jeudy, consensus wide receiver 40 versus Baltimore. Now the Ravens have allowed basically everybody to throw against them. It's a mediocre secondary coupled with teams trailing early and often against them. They're allowing 9.2 PPR points, more than expectation. 9 fantasy points more than expectation to outside receivers when you adjust for the opponents Baltimore has faced. We like that. Jeudy primarily plays on the outside right now. So yeah, Jerry Jeudy had a quiet week 7, but that was with 3 different quarterbacks. We've got Jameis Winston at quarterback now. And I've got a Jeudy stat for you, but we're going to save it for the pick'em part of the show. This is my favorite stat of the week, folks. But first, Ricky Pearsall. We're going to start him. Consensus wide receiver 55 versus the Cowboys. The man is shot in the chest 2 months ago. He makes his season debut last week. 5 targets. Do I smell Brian Robinson of the receiver variety? I think I do. Brandon Ayuk, torn ACL. George Kittle, foot sprain. Deebo Samuel, pneumonia. Juwan Jennings missed last week with a hip injury. Christian McCaffrey is still not ready. Dallas has been a plus matchup for receivers this year. Pearsall is a versatile wide receiver who can win in the slot or outside. I think he stands to benefit rest of season as well from Ayuk's absence more than Jennings, where outside of that 40-point outburst in week 2, Jennings has mostly been a role player for his career. Pretty Ricky, the team traded up for him in round 1 of the draft this year. I think he's a fantasy wide receiver 3 if Juwan Jennings and or Deebo sits, a flex play otherwise. Let's turn to tight end. At tight end, start. Finally, we can start. Oh, thank goodness we can start Sam LaPorta. Consensus tight end 10 versus the Titans. Jameson Williams is suspended for 2 games. I don't really have much hope for Sam LaPorta rest of season, but for these 2 games, I do. Less target competition. For me, it's hard to see Tim Patrick or Allen Robinson or Khalif Raymond. Thanks to the chat. Love Khalif Raymond in the chat. I don't think any of those guys hold him back versus the Titans. It's a get-right game for the second-year tight end. I'll discuss LaPorta more shortly as well. And then we've got Cade Otton. The Fantasy Pros consensus tight end 11 versus the Falcons. 6 or more targets in 4 of his last 5 games. He had 10 targets. He caught 8 of them for 100 yards last week. There's no Chris Godwin. There's no Mike Evans. We're getting the David Njoku type situation all over again. David Njoku, people were like, oh, I think I'm going to start him this week. Oh, yeah, look what happened last week. David Njoku goes for 80 yards and a touchdown. We could very much get that with Cade Otton this week. We could very much get that with him this week. Before we take an ad break, let's look at the chat. Some help at wide receiver post injuries. Who's your favorite? Shakir, Douglas, Jeudy, Tillman, McMillan. I would go Jeudy. We'll talk about him more later. Don't worry. And then should I trade Adams and Rachaad White for Devon Achane? That sounds fair. Yeah, I don't have a strong preference there. That's a good trade. I think I'd lean the package just because I think you can start both those guys. But if you're a really good team and wouldn't be starting Rachaad White otherwise, who I would start this week as a top 20 option, as I mentioned, then sure, let's do it.
Hey, I know it's a popular statistic to cite, these underdog pick'ems, the vast majority of people go more than on any given player. Yeah, close to 80% of people, but that's because it's easier to find the shootouts than it is to find the dud games every Sunday afternoon. Like we knew week 5, Ravens-Bengals was going to be a shootout. And there goes Lamar Jackson for 4 touchdowns. There goes Joe Burrow for 5 touchdowns. Derrick Henry gets there. Zay Flowers is over 100 yards. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins both got there, as well as Chase Brown. Both Chases got there. You go more than, you win 100x your payout on Underdog with their Pick 6 contest. But then you look at Dolphins-Patriots, that's going down the toilet, right? Too bad Rhamondre Stevenson had 18 fantasy points. But you improve your chances at positive returns when you correlate with these Underdog pick'ems. Use promo code Underworld. This is the biggest bonus Underdog has ever given out, up to $125. Promo code is Underworld. Put in $250, you get $125. Now go start picking.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Josh Larky. This is the Dominator. Week 8 starts and sits. We hit you with the starts. Let's hit you with the sits. And then we'll leave you with the Underdog Fantasy Pick-4 entry of the week. Quarterback. Sit Baker Mayfield. Consensus by Fantasy Pros, quarterback 10 versus the Falcons. Baker Mayfield is currently the quarterback 2 in fantasy points per game, but Chris Godwin's out for the season. Mike Evans is out for the next few weeks. I think Tampa Bay goes extremely run heavy here against the Falcons, along with a lot of running back targets. And here is the kicker. If everyone loved Baker Mayfield for fantasy, then they would like his receivers, or at least one of his receivers. This is where the argument for Baker Mayfield falls apart. I'm like, oh, you like Baker Mayfield? Yes. Well, do you like his receivers? No. Well, where is the aggregate passing yardage coming from? I looked at the consensus rankings. I started scrolling. I kept scrolling. I took a shower while scrolling. I went for a run. I was still scrolling until I got to wide receiver 57, Jalen McMillan. Wide receiver 68, Sterling Shepard. Wide receiver 82, Trey Palmer. If you like Baker Mayfield, why don't you like his receivers? Nobody likes his receivers. We should be very, very concerned. Baker Mayfield, yeah, quarterback 2 in fantasy points per game because of Evans and Godwin. He had great weapons. He lost them both. Don't start him this week. Running back. Sit Rhamondre Stevenson. Running back 27 versus the Jets. My relationship with Rhamondre's rocky. I told you to sit him when he was supposed to be benched, and then he wasn't benched, and he scored a long touchdown. I apologize. But here's the thing. So the Jets this week aren't even a bad matchup. I'm not going to be like, you have to sit Rhamondre because it's a bad matchup. My concern is the low touchdown upside. The Patriots team total in the betting markets is only 17 total points. And now it's a 3-way backfield. Last week, Rhamondre Stevenson had 7 carries and 3 targets. Antonio Gibson had 3 carries and a target. And then JaMychal Hasty had 2 carries, 5 targets. It's a headache. We need Rhamondre to have practically all the work in an offense like this. He can't be giving away carries to Gibson and then giving away receiving work to JaMychal Hasty. And then we're going to sit Nick Chubb, running back 35 versus the Ravens. I told you to sit Chubb last week. I think he had like 10 fantasy points. You kind of got bailed out from a touchdown. But so the Ravens, here's why we're going to sit him again. You didn't get burned by sitting him last week. You're welcome. He was like in the running back 20s. It was crazy. So Nick Chubb faces the Ravens. The Ravens are allowing 52 rushing yards per game to running backs at 3.1 yards per carry. That's dreadful. The Ravens have allowed 4 total rushing touchdowns over 7 games. And the Browns offense is a mess. You beat the Ravens by throwing against them. Chubb had 11 carries, 22 yards, and then he scored last week. 11 for 22. The Browns team totals 17.5 points. They're 10-point underdogs. It's the wrong game script. Nick Chubb's anytime touchdown odds are plus 175 in the betting markets. That's terrible. That implies roughly a 1 in 3 chance that Nick Chubb scores. That is not a chance I want to take for Nick Chubb. Receiver, sit Terry McLaurin. Consensus wide receiver 17 versus the Bears. So he had 6 catches, 98 receiving yards last week with Marcus Mariota. But that was against Carolina. I think that's why he's the wide receiver 17 this week. That was against Carolina. The Bears are a well-rested elite secondary coming off their bye. I think the Commanders have a conservative game plan when passing with Mariota. The Commanders team totals just 20.5 points in the betting markets. It's come way down. With no teams on bye in week 8, there's just better fantasy options. McLaurin should not be the wide receiver 17. Also, in shallower formats, we can sit Marvin Harrison, consensus wide receiver 24 at the Dolphins. He's averaging under 3 catches and under 43 receiving yards per game. That will improve soon. His catch rate is under 47%. It's going to improve. He's getting more targets. They're starting to come. But the Dolphins are a tough matchup for outside and slot receivers. Marvin Harrison Jr. has been moved all over the formation this year without much success. Wherever he lines up, he's probably not going to have a plus matchup against the Dolphins. I think he's more of a flex play until he gets on the same page with Kyler Murray. And I'm not sure this is the week that it's going to happen. And then Khalil Shakir. He's trending towards sit status. Consensus has him wide receiver 32 at the Seahawks. His average depth of target in week 7 was less than half a yard downfield. He caught all 7 targets for 65 yards. But that's efficiency we should not expect each week. He's no longer the number 1 there. Amari Cooper was traded there. He's now kind of the number 2, number 3 with Dalton Kincaid. The Seahawks are not a good matchup for slot receivers either. It's bad news. Tight end. Sorry, folks. No strong leans on the tight end sits for this week. But I got that Underdog Pick'em for you. Here's 4 picks to 10x your money on Underdog Fantasy promo code Underworld. Javonte Williams, higher than 0.5 rushing and receiving touchdowns. I think Javonte Williams scores this week. The Panthers are allowing 2 touchdowns per game to running backs, 14 through 7 games. Running backs have scored at least once in every game. The Broncos have the 4th highest team total in the betting markets. This feels like a great one to bank on. Is Javonte Williams getting in the box? Sam LaPorta, higher, 35.5 receiving yards. So he's already 4-2 to the higher this year. And now there's no Jameson Williams. I think the bounce back game is incoming for him. So for everyone listening on this Thursday morning, I guess we'll see. No, just kidding. I was gonna say we'll see soon enough. Well, I'm getting, oh my God. The Lions played the Vikings last week. I'm so sorry. The Vikings and the Rams play tonight. My brain is getting scrambled. We will see on Sunday how this plays out. Oh, oof. Jeez, it's a long season. It's week 8. 3rd pick, Nick Chubb, lower, 58.5 rushing plus receiving yards. So he had the 11 carries, 22 yards, and a touchdown last week. Rushing, 3 targets. He caught 1 for 10 yards. Receiving versus the Bengals. That was a much better matchup. There's some chance Jerome Ford even returns this week and takes some work from him. The game script's not in his favor. I just don't think the team's going to go from him having 12 touches last week to 20 this week after his knee injury. I think he's maybe 1 or 2 more weeks away from really getting into that workload. And then this is my favorite wide receiver stat of the week. Here it comes. So we're going to go Jerry Jeudy higher than 42.5 receiving yards. It correlates with Chubb, where like if the Browns can't run, they're probably trying to throw. Now here it is. Jerry Jeudy profiles as Jameis Winston's wide receiver 1. You might be like, well, Josh, last week he had 1 catch for 18 yards. Yes, 5 targets, 1 catch, 18 yards. But 4 of those targets and the 18-yard catch were on the final drive of the game from Jameis Winston. Jerry Jeudy had a 36% target share with Jameis Winston. He is Jameis Winston's wide receiver 1. Jameis Winston is starting at quarterback. If I told you that you could get Jameis Winston's wide receiver 1 at 42.5 receiving yards in a game where they are heavy underdogs with a plus matchup, you would take that and run. You would take that and run. Folks, I'm going to get you out of here. We got a few quick questions in the chat. Worthy Odunze, Deontay half PPR. Oh boy. Wolino Odunze. That's not a strong lean there though. Keon Coleman or Jalen McMillan, PPR. I think I'd lean McMillan for the floor. Fant or Freiermuth. I think I'd lean Freiermuth. No preference because DK Metcalf's out. No strong preference. Eagles defense or Chargers defense. I think I'd lean, probably lean Chargers there. Leggett or Tillman. Oh boy. Dylan, Gibson, Leggett, or Tillman. That is how we're going to end the show, folks. Does he even get an answer? Or should we just end this show with, I'm Josh Larky. This is the Dominator. Thank you, everyone. Leggett or Tillman. Oh, boy. If it's Bryce Young, I might lean Tillman. Thank you. We'll be back next week.